Welcome, students, faculty, staff, alumni, and neighbors, to this first ever Tocqueville homecoming event. My name is Brent Nelson, and I am the director of the Tocqueville Center for the Study of Democracy and Society, and a member of the Department of Politics and International Affairs. Before we go any further, I would like to draw your attention to the QR code above me here. This code will take you to a website that will allow you to submit questions to our speakers. Open up the website on your phone, and then, if you wish, submit a question at any time during the program. We won't be able to get to all the questions, but we promise to get to some. Now to the event. The Tocqueville Center is honored to be part of this year's homecoming festivities. I hope you received a brochure that looks like this when you came in the door that will introduce the center to those of you who may not be familiar with our activities. The brochure details our well-known speaker series for this academic year. It also contains several other QR codes that will take you to the Tocqueville website where you can find additional resources, including recordings of past lectures, interviews with interesting guests, student blogs of by our Tocqueville Fellows, and much more. Please add your name to our email list so you get our semi-regular emails that tell you about upcoming events. The Tocqueville Center exists to prepare thoughtful, informed, and ethical persons, human beings, as Wendell Berry once wrote, in the fullest sense of these words, not just trained workers or knowledgeable citizens, but responsible heirs and members of the human culture. We invite students, faculty, and the Furman community to engage seriously with diverse and competing religious, political, and ethical viewpoints. We want to expose the community, as Matthew Arnold often said, to the best that has been thought and said in the world. In addition, we uphold free inquiry as essential to education and civic life, recognizing that a just society remains open to examination of its deepest assumptions. In many ways, we take our cues from Alexis de Tocqueville, the 19th century French aristocrat, social scientist, philosopher, politician, and world traveler, who in his classic 1835 book, Democracy in America, asked profound questions about this civilization on the North American continent, built on a new social fact, equality. In his exploration of American society and politics, Tocqueville asked the most profound questions about human nature, the providence of God, religious sentiment, family norms, the injustices of slavery, and of course, how an equal people attempts to govern itself without falling into tyrannies of majorities or the despotism of one-man rule. These are questions we still ask, and we invite anyone interested to join us in this endeavor. Today, we are asking a big question that concerns most of us in this room. Why is American higher education in crisis? Long before Donald Trump took office in January, universities and colleges in the United States faced multiple challenges: shifting demographics, rising costs, student debt, increased government regulation, changes in college athletics, political polarization, charges of irrelevance, a growing culture gap between universities and the rest of America, and stagnant faculty salaries, a topic of particular interest and importance to some of us in this room. Oh, and then Donald Trump took office. It's not hard to prove that American higher education is in crisis when the best of the best universities in the world are finding their funding cut, their integrity questioned, and their leadership publicly shamed. What is a college to do? Fortunately, this afternoon, we have three individuals who can help us understand the problems facing higher education and how we might address them. I'm going to introduce each one and invite them to have a seat on the stage. I will then invite each one again to give a set of remarks from here at the lectern. Once all three have spoken, we will engage in a discussion on stage that will eventually extend to questions submitted to us from you, the audience. So now to our speakers. Elizabeth Davis became Furman University's 12th president on July 1st, 2014. Before coming to Furman, she spent 22 years at Baylor University in Texas, where she was a member of the accounting faculty and later held the position of executive vice president and provost. Before beginning her higher education career, she spent 3 years as an auditor at Arthur Andersen Co in New Orleans. President Davis earned her Bachelor of Business Administration degree from Baylor and her Ph.D. from Duke. Please welcome President Elizabeth Davis. Senator Ben Sasse is President Emeritus and Professor at the University of Florida. He earned his BA at Harvard, MA at St. John's College, and PhD at Yale University. Senator Sasse taught at Yale, the University of Texas at Austin, and Midland University. He served as an assistant secretary in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in the George W. Bush administration before being named Midland University's 15th president in 2010. Senator Sasse was elected to the United States Senate in 2014 and again in 2020. He was named the 13th president of the University of Florida in 2023. Sasse is the author of 2 New York Times national best-selling books, The Vanishing American Adult, Our Coming-of-Age Crisis and How to Rebuild a Culture of Self-Reliance, and Them, Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal. Welcome, Senator Ben Sasse. And finally, John Tomasi is the inaugural president of Heterodox Academy, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization of faculty, staff, and students dedicated to promoting open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement at colleges and universities. Prior to joining HXA, Professor Tomasi held the position of Romeo Elton 1843 Professor of Natural Theology at Brown University. And as I said last night, that is the greatest chair title I have ever heard. And by the way, 1843, that's really close to when Tocqueville published his book in 1835. So there's a real connection there. He received his BA from Colby College, his MA from the University of Arizona, and his BPhil and DPhil from Oxford University. He is the author of Free Market Fairness and Liberalism Beyond Justice, and his most recent book is The Individualists, Radicals, Reactionaries, and the Struggle for the Soul of Libertarianism. Please welcome John Tomasi. Okay, as I mentioned, we are going to now have 3 individual talks on the state of higher education in America, and we begin with President Davis, please.
Well, thank you, Brent, and thanks to all of you for being here this evening. If you're a Furman graduate, I'm glad you've come home. I would also like to extend a special welcome to our guests, Senator Sasse and Professor Tomasi. Free inquiry and free expression are foundational to higher education. Furman is committed to a rigorous education with freedoms to speak, write, inquire, listen, challenge, and learn through exposure to a spectrum of ideas, as this forum tonight illustrates. Higher education is no stranger to crises. When populations of young people live, study, and socialize together, the cultural issues of the day find their way onto college campuses. In my lifetime alone, colleges have been on the front lines of debates around integration and the Vietnam War. Before the pandemic, universities were addressing mental health crises. After the pandemic, we were dealing with pandemic-related crises. Indeed, universities are where societal problems are untangled and understood, intellectually, scientifically, and socially. A recent survey by the Pew Research Center revealed that 70% of people surveyed think higher ed is moving in the wrong direction. And guess what? This is something with which both parties agree. 77% of Republicans and 65% of Democrats say we're on the wrong course. So what are we doing wrong? Well, the cost of a college education, though widely variable across the sector, is an obvious issue for many Americans who can't afford post-secondary education. Our costs have risen, as they have throughout the marketplace. Students demand more for their education than they did a generation ago. The college experience today includes more programs that prepare students for life after college. At Furman, we offer extensive programs in study away, research, internships, and other experiences. We provide stipends and discounted housing for students who do research over the summer, and we pay for students' internships if their employers don't. These aren't perks, they're expected. Some universities promise a debt-free experience for students from families under certain income levels. Wake Forest and Emory are the latest to do so. At Furman, we're working on addressing affordability. Our Clearly Furman campaign has focused on endowing scholarships so more students can come to school here without having to worry about finances. In 1 year, we doubled our commitments to new scholarships from commitments last year in 2024 of $10 million to $20 million in 2025. This makes resources available for academic needs and helps ensure more students will graduate debt-free. But we also have to do a better job of communicating the value of a college education, especially a liberal arts and sciences degree. Employers tell us that our students are better prepared for their careers than graduates of other schools, not just because of the rigor of our education, but how we provide knowledge. What is needed now more than ever are people who can adapt, who can think on their feet, who can solve problems and think outside of the box. Schools like Furman instill this in their students. This is a credit to our provost, our dean, and our faculty, who very thoughtfully teach our students to think broadly, creatively, critically, and independently. Our students learn to approach problems from multiple perspectives. The Pew survey also showed that only 17% of people think we do an excellent or a very good job of providing students the opportunities to express their opinions, while 46% think we do a fair or poor job. At Furman, we've observed a rise in concern about free speech in recent years. Conservative students, more frequently than liberal students, say they self-censor, choosing to keep their thoughts to themselves rather than to speak up in class or social settings for fear of being ridiculed. That is not acceptable. Getting doxxed, shamed on social media, or unfriended because of one's political or religious views is a legitimate fear. Some of our alumni from the Furman Free Speech Alliance are here. They let me know when they think we're limiting speech or exposure to ideas and perspectives, and they, along with other groups and individuals, are vocal advocates for free speech. I appreciate their doggedness. We should acknowledge, too, that Furman is a small community where belonging and mattering as an individual is a necessary condition of thriving and doing one's best work. Thus, engaging thoughtfully and empathetically with those who share different beliefs or values is critical. We've taken significant measures at Furman to promote free speech among students and to support our faculty's ability to teach effectively. Our intergroup dialogue program is a collaborative effort between student life and academic affairs to provide students, faculty, and staff with a range of unique dialogue-based experiences. Starting in 2017, it has offered both credit-bearing and non-credit-bearing opportunities for students to engage across a wide range of disciplines. For example, in 2024, Dr. Claire Whitlinger from sociology and Dr. Eric Andersen from philosophy taught the course Polarization and Political Identities. Half the students identified as conservative and half as liberal, and at the end of the course, both groups had gained a greater awareness of their commonalities, not just their differences. Our On Discourse initiative also teaches students how to engage with people who have different opinions or beliefs. Dr. Tomasi was featured at an On Discourse event just last night. Furman is a heterogeneous environment. Students encounter a diversity of people here just like they will after graduation, though once they leave campus, they will no longer have the challenge and support of their faculty and mentors. That's why it's critical for us to be intentional about providing students with the opportunities to learn the skills of healthy discourse while they're here. Now, this might dispel a myth, but we are not in the business of changing students' political views or their values. I hear from many parents when they don't like something, and nobody has ever complained to me about indoctrination. We survey our first-year students when they arrive and our seniors before they graduate regarding many things, including political affiliation. We have no evidence that political affiliation is changing significantly across the 4 years. Students bring to college the views and values they grew up with and those that reflect their generation. We ask them to listen to each other with curiosity and engage with kindness and empathy. I think the most profound challenges to higher education are the political forces involved in academia like never before. We've heard about university presidents and professors being fired, federal grants stopped, and structural changes that universities spent years creating being torn asunder under threat of losing federal funding. The latest political move is a compact offering preferential treatment with several conditions that align with the administration's platform. Scholars across the political spectrum have written about how untenable the conditions are. Academic freedom, teaching, and discovery cannot be steered by the winds of political whimsy. Until recently, government has played a very limited role in who gets into college, who gets to be a professor, and what universities teach. Now international students stay in their home countries, and faculty are afraid of losing the ability to teach and conduct research without outside influence or interference. Academic freedom opens doors to greater understanding. It leads to discovery. It helps students expand their worldview and approach problems with richer perspectives. We affirmed our commitment to these values in a statement on freedom of inquiry and expression. And last month, I assured our faculty that the indiscriminate firing of faculty cannot and will not happen at Furman. We're fortunate to have on campus a permanent reminder of the power of higher education and academic freedom. The Charlestown's Science Center is named for the Nobel laureate and Furman graduate who invented the maser, a precursor to the laser. He followed his scientific intuition, first here, then at Duke, Caltech, Columbia, and Bell Labs. Like so many scientists who have contributed to medical and technological advances, Towns collaborated with other academic scientists, unhindered by political agendas. He once credited tenure, that unique, often maligned privilege earned by faculty, with allowing him the freedom to create the maser. Higher education isn't perfect, and the work of improving what we do is never finished. But the fundamental structure that gave Charlestown's the freedom to pursue ideas is still effective today. I'll say one more thing about crises. They often come about or are exacerbated when organizations, including universities, lose their way, have a lapse in judgment, or forget their values. While I work with my colleagues and peers around the country on issues in higher education, my main responsibility is to Furman. And I couldn't be prouder of the work our students, faculty, and staff do, and our unflagging commitment to values. Just as Dr. Nelson started this program, calling us to have our open minds and to listen and engage, we frequently remind ourselves of our value statement. It is our North Star that guides all of our decisions. So I'd like to read a few lines from that statement. In championing the liberal arts and sciences, Furman University cultivates a community of learners engaged in an effort to understand themselves, the world, and their place in it. We steadfastly protect freedom of inquiry and hold ourselves to high standards of excellence and integrity. We advocate respect for all people and actively welcome perspectives from a wide variety of backgrounds, cultures, and beliefs. We aspire to advance thriving communities that honor inquiry, promote diversity, strive for equity, appreciate beauty, and act as responsible stewards of our planet. These aspirations inspire our vision and shape our mission, calling us to meet the challenges and responsibilities of a complex, diverse, and rapidly changing world with courage, moderation, justice, wisdom, and humility. I believe the most effective way to avoid or manage through a crisis is to have closely held values that represent the community and aspire to change the world and refer to them often. Thank you.
Thank you, President Davis, and welcome, Senator Sasse.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you all for making time on a Friday afternoon. I believe there might be some pre-tomorrow tailgate happy hours already beginning, so thank you for investing in one of the first academic programs at a Furman homecoming. I'm delighted to be here for a bunch of reasons. Number one, I'm friends with a lot of your alumni, and I had never been on your lovely campus, and it is as good as they all said, so I'm delighted to be here. Number two, I'm a Tocqueville nerd, and there are only so many of us in the world, so sometimes you need to travel to find other ones. Number three, I'm delighted to be here because this is a meaty and important subject. Talking about the crisis in higher ed is important for all of us who care about this really important millennia-old institution and the fact that higher ed reform is going to come, and it would be much better for it to be done constructively and with lots of internal voices rather than just from a meat axe from the outside. Fourth, and I promise to not get detoured or delayed too long, but it's pretty important for me to have a return to Greenville. This is only my second time in Greater Greenville ever. And the last one was super embarrassing, and so I need to get up off the mat. You can't see it because I like this room, but the lighting won't show it. But I have 5 stitches just under the right side of my chin. And I'm not going to give you the whole story, but I was in a wedding here in the summer of 1998. And we might have stayed out too late the night before. The the groom's friends and party at the bachelor party. But what I remember most about the weekend is it was a traditional Southern wedding, and by which I mean way too many bridesmaids and too many groomsmen. The only reason I made it, frankly, is because this guy pretty much needed to bribe some people because his wife-to-be was going to have 13 bridesmaids, and I don't think he really knew 13 dudes. So 13 of us are in the wedding, and a lot of the groomsmen are getting to know each other at the rehearsal dinner and at the rehearsal itself. And there was a really, let's just go with autocratic. People use too many totalitarian words in our politics right now. So let's just say there was a very autocratic lady who was the wedding coordinator. And she was telling us as we're getting ready the night before, hey, the sermon could go long at the wedding. And if you do, this was going to be at Second Presbyterian Church of Greenville, the AC isn't working all that well. She was predicting accurately that the next morning, the wedding was at 11:30. It would be 102 degrees in the sanctuary. And she said, if you ever feel a little faint during the sermon, there's no shame in just taking a seat in the front row for a little bit during the sermon and then getting back up. So I'm a wet behind the ears, super annoying, know-it-all 26-year-old. And it just so happens that the groomsman who's next to me is an NFL coach. I'm the son of a lifelong high school coach and football coach. And so we live and breathe football as the second most important religion in Nebraska. And so without even thinking, I just look at this guy and go, yeah, right. Like I'm ever taking myself out of the game. You'd have to carry me out of there. Fast forward to the next morning. 102 degrees at the wedding. I'm feeling a little bit faint, and I'm thinking, we have an English morning tux on. It's wool. They're like 4 layers. I'm going to pass out. I already pledged you'd have to carry me out of here. I've never taken myself out of the game. So I just stood there until I passed out and hit my face on oak steps at Second Presbyterian Church of Greenville. When I came to, my arms are not in my tux because I had been carried out. I was like in a straitjacket because when they picked me up off the ground, I'd bled all over the sanctuary. Anyway, I pledge to you, as a 53-year-old, if somehow I get faint tonight, I'm going to sit down. I'm not going to bleed all over you. I'm not going to have a Chumbawamba moment. You get knocked down, no 5 stitches. Okay, back to the meat of our program. I am not going to speak precisely about the crisis inside higher ed. I'd like to set the stage about what I think of as the Tocquevillian collapse of American institutions more broadly. So I want to trace around the perimeter between President Davis's comments and between Dr. Tomasi's comments. When we get to our discussion session, I know that we're going to have a lot of meat inside higher ed. So I'd just like to set higher ed next to the other sectors of the American economy. Pew and Gallup have been measuring public trust in American institutions for 6-7 decades, but for 5 consecutive decades, we have a lot of data on the public's trust of the military, big business, the judiciary, the media, religious institutions, higher education, etc. The 10 major sectors of American life that Pew and Gallup have been measuring over the last 60 years. 9 of the 10 have had declining public trust for 4 consecutive decades, and most of the 9 have had declining public trust for 5 consecutive decades. The only outlier is the military has roughly flat public trust over the last half century, but all the other 9 sectors that we've been measuring have been collapsing, but higher ed the most rapidly over the last 15 years. I swear I wasn't cribbing off your president's notes. I write for the Wall Street Journal a little bit, and I have a piece coming out about the AAUP on Tuesday. And so I happen to also have been looking at a lot of the polling data that she cited. So I won't repeat all of her data, but I would just underscore 2 really important points. She made the point that 70% of the public, including 77% of Republicans and 65% of Democrats, think higher education is on the wrong track. Another way to say it is, if you drill down a layer, do people want their kids to go to college? And do they think this is a valuable way to invest 4 years of your life at age 18 to 22? 15 years ago, in 2010, 75% of Americans thought going to college was very important. 15 years ago, 75% of Americans thought college was very important. Last year, we don't have this year's data yet, last year it was only 1/3 of the public. So a more than halving of the number of Americans who think sending their kids to higher ed is important in less than half a generation. We have no equivalent data about the collapse of public trust in any institutional sector like that. Why is this happening? I think there's a bunch wrong inside higher ed, but the larger thing that's happening is the growing decline of trust more generally. So I want to name 4 variables that are happening around us. 1, the politicization of our politics and the rising tribalism is now spilling over into almost all cultural institutions. Number 2, and this one is a little paradoxical, but affluenza, I think, is a contributing variable to what we're going through. And by that I mean we are the richest people any time and place in all of human history. In all of human history, there's never been a middle class as rich as the American middle class is today. And one of the things that happens when you get richer is you have smaller or lesser needs of the people around you. Communitarianism shrivels if there's not a lot of common cause around survival. And so we end up with a lot of rich person ailments that happen when our institutions don't seem to have near the necessity that they used to have to people, but rather you can use them as sort of luxury beliefs, and we can use them as cultural piñatas. 3rd and 4th are both technological issues. The first is the rise of social media. One of John's colleagues is Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, if you haven't read it, highly recommend. I don't say this as a form of humble brag. I say this as a form of setting the stage for how insignificant my work has been compared to John's. I have 2 books. Both of them were New York Times national bestsellers. The better of them sold 118,000 copies. I think Haidt's book has sold 2.9 million copies in the last 18 months. And this is at a time when people are not buying nonfiction. There's still some book sales in America, but they tend to be cotton candy-ish fiction literature. I mean, cotton candy as opposed to good fiction. And nonfiction is just not selling. You can't get a book contract right now on Madison Avenue. But the anxious generation is off the charts, and so we should talk a little bit about what we know social media in general and screen addiction more broadly is doing to our attention span and to the nature of a literate society, which is a prerequisite for having a republic. And 4th and finally, in the larger digital revolution, there's so much disruption in the economy that it's harder and harder for people to have confidence that anybody can help them navigate it, let alone institutions that tend to have, despite short-term budget pressures, despite all sorts of important issues that need to be presided over by presidents and boards of trustees. At the end of the day, universities are large bureaucracies that are usually pretty slow to change. They're dispositionally small c conservative or bureaucratically conservative. So again, the 4 in my mind, political tribalization is spilling over into adjacent cultural institutions. 2, affluenza. 3, the nature of social media. And 4, the digital revolution. I'm going to use the digital revolution as the way to get into it quickly without giving you a monologue on each of the 4. What is the digital revolution? I think it is a recognition of the fact that we live in a time where the marginal cost of anything that can be reduced to a series of steps is going to move closer and closer to 0. Maybe it will become actually free, but it's certainly going to become so close to free that we're not going to bother metering it anymore. What does that mean? It means economics as a discipline is going to be turned on its head because historically we always thought of boundary constraints as things that have very real trade-offs inside them. 50 or 500 years from now, when you look back on our moment, I think we're not going to talk much about at all about our politics. We're going to talk about the fact that we were already some of the richest people ever, and all of a sudden the hockey stick curve is going to go to the moon because anything that can be reduced to a series of steps is going to be reduced to a series of steps, and compute is going to become so cheap that you can automate all of those functions. Almost everyone who's ever come before us in human history, hunter-gatherers, nomadic era, second stage agrarianism from 10,000 years ago until, say, 200 years ago. I'm from Nebraska. We still have really important agricultural stuff going on, but it's a subset of the digital revolution. Number 3, the industrial era from 175 years ago until 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And the 4th kind of economics of all of human history that we live through now, the knowledge economy, the information economy, the post-industrial economy, which is just another way to say the after the last thing because we don't really know what this thing is. 3 of these 4 have in common atoms: hunter-gatherers, ATOMs, not Adam as in Adam and Eve. Hunter-gatherers, agrarians, and industrialists, almost everybody, everywhere, worked with their hands about material stuff. Going forward, almost everybody in the future is going to work with bits instead of atoms. That revolution is so profound we can't really even make sense of it, but it informs all three of these other things. Historically, humans needed to team with people around them. There are really only two kinds of community. There are communities of place and there are communities of idea. People used to have ideas. They had theology, they had philosophy, they had ways to make sense of death and suffering. But by and large, you lived with people who you hugged and you broke bread with and you made babies with and maybe you fought with. Increasingly, our communities are not communities of place. They're communities of either productivity or, more often, distraction by the supercomputers we walk around with in our pockets. We live at a time where all of us, I'm dumb enough to have 3 of these devices, all of us are walking around with supercomputers that have more compute capacity than auditorium-size venues at Lincoln Labs at MIT in the late 1950s and early 1960s that won the Cold War. Literally, there are lots of ways to argue why the U.S. beat the Soviets in the Cold War, but one of the most simple was the economy produced better technology and we were going to win military conflict if it ever came to that. The compute capacity that led to winning the Cold War was nothing compared to what we all walk around with all day today, and it means that we transcend time and space all the time, and we don't have the most natural kinds of relationships that are those that come from the people that you're with and you're breaking bread with. It's one of the fundamental reasons why it's so important to preserve these kinds of institutions, because they're still institutions of place where you get to know how to grapple with people that weren't a part of your nuclear family that share your whole world view. We're entering a world where you're going to have more and more conflict unless you silo into bubbles online, and that conflict needs to be mediated by people that can do the kind of stuff that the Heterodox Academy is trying to persuade us to do, but we don't have any muscle memory yet around what it looks like to build this. I'll wrap at this point. Why is higher ed in a deeper crisis than other institutions, though almost all of our institutions in a Tocquevillian sense are in crisis and need to be rebuilt? One of the reasons is because these institutions historically made 2 kinds of claims. We will prepare you for work and we will prepare you for life. Right now, most people don't have a view of the good in either of those lanes. And so if I don't know what it means to prepare me for work, Mark Andreessen's famous Wall Street Journal essay in 2012, software is going to eat the world, was exactly right. We were headed for a place where going from that atom-based economy that everyone's always known, to the bit-based world, not just economics, but culture that we're going to live, is so profoundly disruptive. It means that every 35, 40, 45, and 50-year-old is going to have to get retrained for new kinds of work again and again and again over the course of their life. Nobody in human history ever had to get retrained at 40, 45, 50, or 55 years old 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And now everybody has to do it. And if we don't know what that looks like, we sure as heck don't have confidence that bureaucratic, small c conservative institutions like universities are going to get us there. So I have less trust. But if you're not going to do the things that prepare me for work, you surely have to be able to prepare me for life. And there, I think we can tee up some of why the insularity of higher education has not invited enough deliberation about the good, the true, and the beautiful, but we've had a migration toward more STEM majors inside the university and a lot less clarity about what it would look like to have any shared theory of what the core is for. What are the humanities for? I say this as a historian, not somebody hostile to the humanities, but maybe skeptical of the ability of many of our humanities faculty to believe that they're speaking to a big and bold public who thinks they're worthy of trust at this time. I look forward to continuing the discussion. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Senator Sasse. And Professor Tomasi.
Good evening. We have a saying on the speaker's circuit, that was a tough act to follow. That was a tough act to follow. So I'm John Tomasi. I'm the president of Heterodox Academy. We're an international group of college professors who love our universities and want to make them better. I often say that we love our universities the way Socrates loved Athens, not uncritically, quite critically, but passionately, consistently, doggedly, and irrevocably. So we're professors who believe that our universities can be better than they are, that their university system is always an unfinished project, that every generation and every decade faces its own unique set of challenges, to have open inquiry, be lively, to have a true diversity of viewpoints on the campus that are lively and expressed, and to have constructive disagreement, which is something like the ability to listen to one another. It's harder than it seems. So that's what HXA does. That's what I spend my life doing, organizing professors and helping university administrators implement those values in concrete ways on their campuses. The question for this, the prompt for this, this gathering is the crisis in higher education. And I'm going to approach that prompt by asking this question: what is the nature of the crisis? So what's the nature of the crisis that we're facing? And when I think of the question that way, I immediately thought about the opening lines of Charles Dickens' The Tale of Two Cities. Some of you know that. I'm going to read them to you in a moment. And The Tale of Two Cities is an account of the French Revolution. I'm going to read the lines, though, and invite you to listen to them with me, thinking of them as a response to something like the MAGA Revolution. So here's the opening lines of A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. What do I mean by that? Well, I think that these are, from an HXA perspective, from the perspective of people who love our universities and want to make them better in those ways, who care about the culture of open inquiry, these are the best of times. Ideas and concepts that we've been talking about at HXA for years are now on everyone's lips. Everyone's talking about viewpoint diversity. Everyone's talking about how universities can be reformed or should be reformed. These topics that we've been caring about for a decade now are front and center on our policy and in our society. HXA has been working on something we call the 4-point agenda to improve our colleges. We work with college, our professors organize into groups on their campuses, and they meet with the college administrators to help them implement these 4 principles. And the 4 principles are, first, to commit to open inquiry, which means to make the statement that, in fact, you care about open inquiry, and you heard that this evening. Second, to unleash the free exchange of ideas, which means to find ways to activate students so they can speak with one another openly and freely. Third, to insist on viewpoint diversity. From 1965 to today, the ratio of Republican to Democratic professors has changed dramatically. It was about 2 to 1 left to right in the 1960s. It's about 20 to 1 now, and in some fields it's closer to 100 to 0. That's a dramatic change in viewpoint diversity. So when we say everyone's for viewpoint diversity, it's easy to be for it. We say insist on viewpoint diversity, find ways to make our campuses more diverse on ideological dimensions and other dimensions as well. And then the fourth point of our 4-point agenda is to invest in constructive disagreement. As I said a minute ago, everyone wants to believe that we're good listeners to one another. It's actually really hard to do. We as humans have these biases. We tend to hear facts that we like and not hear the facts we don't like. I'll tell just a quick anecdote about that, if I may. I'm Catholic. My mother-in-law spent her life her career doing classical music bookings. And one Sunday I was at her home, and a neighbor came by, kind of a bumptious neighbor. And the neighbor, over the course of breakfast, said, "You know, I think the Catholic Church is going to go the same way as the classical music. They're both going to go extinct." He walked out of the room. After he left, I said to my mother-in-law, "Can you believe he said that about the Catholic Church?" And she says, "What are you talking about? Can you believe he said that about the classical music?" And I kid you not, I literally did not hear him insult classical music. So that's just a small example. It's what makes it vivid to me that we're all like you, each of us is like that. We have these biases. So constructive disagreement, to invest in constructive disagreement, means more than saying, yeah, we're all going to listen to each other. It means actually learning ways to bring the attention of students and faculty members to our own human biases. That we're all like me in the kitchen when someone talks about Catholicism and classical music in all these different spheres. So those are the things that we care about at HXA. And when I say it's the best of times, what I want to share with you is that my inbox, my email inbox, changed dramatically in around February 13th or so. College presidents who I've been reaching out to for years, sometimes politely saying, well, you can talk to someone else on my staff, sometimes not even replying. These college presidents now are flooding my inbox with requests for help. So I have a whole line now, we have a whole line now of presidents and groups of trustees who are calling out to HXA to ask us, well, how can we implement these ideas? How can we build a whole culture of open inquiry? Because those 4 values that I mentioned, the values of unleashing the free exchange of ideas, of insisting on viewpoint diversity, and investing in constructive disagreement, they all work together. You can have an environment where there is formal freedom of speech, so people feel free to say anything they want, let's say. But if they all think the same thing at that place, you're not going to have knowledge production in any kind of interesting way. If you have a diversity of viewpoints on a campus and the students and on the faculty, and you have freedom of speech, but no one knows how to listen, you're again not going to have the production of knowledge in the right way. You have to have a culture of open inquiry that has all 3 of those values actively at play at the same time, simultaneously. And what we're seeing now is, for the first time, we're seeing presidents reaching out just because across the country, there's a movement afoot to build these changes on our campuses. That's the best of times. It's also the worst of times. Our language, the language of HXA, a lot of our values, especially viewpoint diversity, but not our methods, have been picked up by the Trump administration. And they're running our playbook in ways that are in some ways really exciting because finally a president's saying the things that we've been saying. But the methods that are being used, we worry are counterproductive to those goals themselves, at least they often are. The slashing of funding, including medical funding, out of concerns for fighting anti-Semitism. I think anti-Semitism is an extremely serious problem on a number of our campuses. I visited the protests, the encampments at Columbia, at NYU, at Brown, some other places. It's a serious issue, but to use that as a way to cut slashing funding for universities, medical research, for example, to put pressure on them is a very worrying approach. The recently announced compact with America, it brings it takes a polarizing approach to this reform project that we all need at our universities. There's features of it that include things like you can't belittle conservative students, and if you do, you lose your funding. Well, no one should be belittled on a college campus, and it is the case that conservatives have been belittled on campuses. But banning belittling on a campus, that's simply safe space culture for the right. It's a flavor of DEI that any serious academic should reject. So I see us being at a moment of incredible opportunity. One of the questions that maybe we'll talk about in the open discussion is, well, if Donald Trump weren't president, and if he weren't pushing these things, would the college presidents be calling me? Like I said, they started calling and emailing me, in February, as they started realizing, wow, this is a serious show we're on now, and our road's going to go for some time. So that's a question that we can talk about if you like. But what I wanted just to close by saying is that I see this as a moment of just remarkable time for higher education reform. In my lifetime, I've never seen anything like the opportunities that we're seeing now. There's dangers in the opportunities, as with every crisis. Are we going direct to heaven? I don't think we're going to go directly to heaven, but I think we may find our winding way towards a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was fun, but there's more fun ahead. Because the first question I usually like to ask panelists is, do you have anything to say to each other? Do you want to react? I hear some pessimism, but I also hear some optimism. Did any of the three of you pick up on something that somebody else said that you would like to address and see if that begins this conversation?
I took a bunch
Ben?
of notes
Yeah.
about what you both said, but not for public consumption.
Okay.
I will.
Yeah, please.
I'd just love to ask you, Elizabeth. So, I've been on campus now for a couple of days. I arrived yesterday. I've been done a number of events, and I've just been so impressed with the level of openness of the students that I've spoken with. Now, maybe some of the students would say we weren't actually telling you what we were really thinking, but some students said some things on this campus that I've not often heard on other campuses. So I heard a student in a recent lunch Tocqueville. What is it?
Tacos in Tocqueville.
Tacos in Tocqueville luncheon with some students, and there was a student there from the Democratic Socialist
Young
Society,
Democratic Socialists.
Young Democratic Socialist group, talking about how their gatherings routinely get 60 people and they have a big group. And then there's a woman there who spoke up and said that they're college Republicans, and she said she's lucky to get 5, which was kind of an interesting thing for her to admit in a class with other students. And the other students said, well, maybe we should actually get together. You should come to our meetings and we should have some actual conversation between our groups. And that kind of stuff is really wonderful. And what I'm wondering about is just how you see this experience, this moment at Furman now, compared to the kind of priorities the administration had 4 or 5 years ago, when DEI was kind of a hot thing, when people saw that there was an opportunity perhaps to finally have a racial awakening in America and address our racial problems in a more serious way. For a while at most universities, that seemed to trump everything else. And DEI often was thought to be more important than free speech. People were often brought into sessions where they were effectively told to be quiet and listen and to learn about race rather than a free exchange of ideas where people can all interact as equals. I'm not sure exactly what my question is, but my question is something like, can you explain that change of emphasis across the country or at Furman? Is this a newfound interest in open inquiry? It's always been here to some degree. Is it a different priority than it used to be? How do you see it?
Well, I will say that it came out of our DEI priorities and how we were executing around those things, because I would hear from people outside the institution who were making assumptions about what was happening on campus, not just around topics around race, but presumptions about hiring, that we were hiring people who weren't, who didn't deserve positions. I was in a session where a guy was about that close to saying that I shouldn't be president. So same thing about admitting students or what was going on in the classroom. So actually, we started on discourse in 23. So this is well in advance of what we're seeing so loudly, I'll say right now, but that had been brewing as, again, I would connect with alumni and other people. So my goal was to elevate, to normalize, and to kind of address some things that you said in your remarks, which is we're terrible at listening. And I think about my 18-year-old self, and I was just so certain, right? So when students come to campus and they have firmly held beliefs and values but have never been around anyone different, it really is up to us to kind of stir the pot, right? But maybe not immediately throw people in the ring until some of that skills development happened. But I will have to say, for the students that you were talking to today, there has to be a level of trust. So perhaps they knew each other, because you don't typically want to jump in and start talking to people with whom you disagree if you don't know them or trust what the outcomes are going to be. So that's how I think sort of the progression of things is really having more clarity around what we're trying to do to have a thriving campus. And I always want to emphasize, people can only do their best work if they're at a place where they feel they belong and where they matter. And that has to include being able to share opinions that are not widely held by others.
I think what I was really hoping to learn was whether these presidents were going to keep calling me 2 or 3 years from now, or not. It's just like, that was a night.
You know, these things are easier, in my opinion, to execute on a smaller campus where students are in classes that are smaller, where faculty are here to teach undergraduates, not to sort of sequester themselves in their labs or offices. Because there is a desire to create a community. When I'm in a room with 600, in a large auditorium, and that's how I'm learning whatever the topic of the day is, I would be less inclined to care what the person sitting next to me had to say. So we are an environment that I think is conducive for these kinds of things. But Brent, I don't know, you've been here a year or two longer than me. I don't know if you have some thoughts.
Ooh, I guess I have. I think there's been a shift. I think there's definitely been a shift. I do think that the conversations have changed, the vocabulary has changed, and I do think, and I think John alluded to it, we are seeing more openness among the students who have been quiet in the past. And I think that was illustrated actually today at lunch. So I hate to think that the government is responsible for this, but I do think that some outside pressure has opened the conversation a bit, and I guess I would be interested. I'm totally with you, John. The goals the reform is needed. The methods have been heavy-handed, to say the least, but it has forced some change in the culture and in the willingness for people to talk. So I can't really speak from the administration's perspective. That was what you asked, but from a professor's perspective, I do think there has been a culture shift in the last few months. Ben, I don't know, you were at Florida when a lot of this was going on. What did you see from the corner office?
Well, the president asked us to stir the pot, so I'll try to do it a tiny little bit, just to keep the conversation salty and saucy. We ended DEI when I was president at Florida, and one of the things I would regularly do is ask audiences whether they were thrilled about that, moderately sympathetic, moderately skeptical, or super angry, is can we tear apart the acronym a little bit and let's define some of our terms? Because I think a huge part of what was wrong with the DEI regime when it was so culturally ascendant from, say, 6 years ago till 2 years ago is not grappling with what the E is. So let's first simplify the equation a little bit and say diversity and inclusion. All healthy people are in favor of diversity and inclusion. There's a lot about this great world that God has created, big and diverse, that there's a lot that we should want to understand more about and be curious about. It's a big, complicated place, and you want to explore nature, and you want to do it with people that bring a lot of different perspectives, because somebody alone or everybody that has the same assumptions you do, you're not going to get nearly as deep into meaty questions. Inclusion, the Tocquevillian shared creed we have as the name of your institute flows in some way from the miracle of Philadelphia 1787, which was a declaration in the universal dignity of everybody, Imago Dei. Humans have dignity, and we're going to disagree about a lot of things. Some of these aren't moral questions, some of them are moral questions, and yet everybody retains dignity, and you should love your neighbor. We should be for inclusion. The debates, I think, fundamentally centered on, can MLK teach at a school that has DEI creeds? Because I submit to you he can't. The I Have a Dream speech, he's verboten. MLK, my childhood hero as a rural Nebraska kid from a 25,000 person farm town that had so little diversity. We were like 24,992 Germans. The debate was whether German Lutheran or German Catholic. We had no diversity. MLK was my childhood hero. MLK can't meet the signing requirements of a lot of DEI statements at elite universities in America. So the debate between equality and equity is pretty important. Equality we should all be for. Equity was about outcomes that require a giant state apparatus to enforce those outcomes. And so I'm pretty happy that the DEI regime is on the decline, but that's not because I'm a skeptic of diversity or inclusion or equality. Lots more to say there, but I think most of this cultural pendulum swing to reevaluate things predates this administration, even though I hear John as surely being right that the leadership of organizations that were being politicized need to figure out how do I respond to something that might affect my funding in the near term. But I think a lot of what we're going through when we look back on this moment 10 years from now, we're going to think the combination of social media and COVID policies led to a lot more social isolation that created a desire for movements. There was an understandable need for people to refine community. Politicized movements are the least interesting movements.
Let me just say, maybe that's true, but I think there's something about the exogenous shock of Donald Trump that's pretty hard to match in terms of describing the change. And John Haidt and I used to joke that for years he and I were out there trying to change higher ed in our small little way, and it was like working on this frozen, windswept terrain where nothing ever moved. And John and I we'd joke we'd be out there like on our hands and knees, chipping away at the ice, trying to make a little piece of ice chip off. Now, suddenly, all the ice is broken up and it's moving around. There are jagged-edged, icebergs coming at us that can cut us to pieces. But there's all kinds of opportunities now. And maybe that was going to be coming more slowly and more gradually from bigger forces. But there's something about the shock and awe of him going after Columbia, threatening to destroy it, to take a prize scalp, that it arrested people's attention. Let's put it that way.
I think one of the reasons we wanted to work on having greater clarity and, quit using DEI language is primarily because of equity. I think you're exactly right on diversity and inclusion, but when I think about outcomes, I think it's our responsibility to help every student who is academically capable to graduate from Furman, but different students need different kinds of help. I think it is imperative that we help our students have an excellent launch from Furman, whether it's into their jobs or into their career, to graduate or professional school. Again, as a 63-year-old woman, I was in the day, there weren't a lot of us, and there were some things that women just kind of need that are a little bit different, right? But at the end of the day, my professors made sure that I advanced. Arthur Andersen made sure I advanced. Baylor made sure I advanced. And so the equity, I think, that gets the people who speak to me, it made me want for us to be clear about what we're doing and why.
Can I pull on a thread there? And this is going to be skeptical of higher ed, but no skeptical of Furman. So you gave me a good out with your point about a teaching-centric institution. We should want our kids to thrive, and we should want kids to come from a lot of different backgrounds, racial, socioeconomic, geographic, et cetera, and people are going to need different helps to do that. I fully agree, and I think there's a lot about a teaching. We need a plurality of institutional forms in American higher ed, but we need more teaching colleges that take seriously that calling and the special role that professors that are primarily teachers take. And I think in a lot of institutions where your real bread and butter is, are you going to get promoted based on your research? Teaching is a burden that people want to figure out how they can check that box and move on. And one of the things that's so broken in American higher ed right now is the rampant grade of inflation that flows from the conspiracy of students not wanting to do work and professors not wanting to assign or grade work. And so I have no illusions to the fact that I was a beneficiary of differential admissions policies, rural Nebraska farm kid. The only reason I went to Harvard is because I was a good wrestler. And when I got there, I had to work my tail off, and I needed a lot of supports to get through. My oldest daughter, my kids are 24, 22, and 14. My oldest daughter's a dummy trying to become a fighter pilot because she doesn't understand the idiots won the debate in Top Gun 2. Everything's going to be autonomous real soon, but that's another fight. But she ended up doing Air Force ROTC at Harvard as well, and I got to re-experience her and her peer group's experience 35 years later, and it isn't a close question. Like, what happens on campus today, with the exception of a few STEM majors, is just radically less demanding than it used to be. The average student experience at Harvard today versus 1990, it isn't close. And the average GPA of the graduating class this June was over 3.8, and in the STEM disciplines, it's 3.65. What does that tell you? It tells you in the humanities, the average GPA is north of a 3.9. That's just completely absurd. There are lots of different debates you could have about what grading is for, but just throw away the grades. Don't pretend you're actually grading anything, and let's try to have our seminars have some people that have actually read the book by the time they come to class. And I think we need to recognize that the declining rigor in the humanities in the country is one of the reasons why public trust is declining. It's also a really poor way to steward students' time, which is far more important than anybody's money. You know, there's the old adage, when you're young, you'll sell your time for money. When you're old, you'll radically give away your money for time. The one thing that's true of us is we're all headed for our deathbeds, and 18 to 22 is a pretty glorious time of life, and to waste some kids 4 or 5 years of life is pretty sacrilegious.
Let me draw attention to a word that I heard in all of your presentations in one way or another, and that word is trust. And in particular, the lack of trust that the American population has for higher education. And by the way, I had all those Pew figures in my notes as well. So we were all looking at the same article about how badly we're doing with the American people. But John's talk also talked about, higher ed has lost trust with the government. So we've lost trust with the population and with the authorities. Now, I guess the big question is, how did we do that? And does that, understanding the reasons, does that lead to a solution? Or are we really in this crisis of all institutions being cratering right now, and we just have to wait it out until the American people decide to trust institutions again? Or is there something that liberal arts schools, major universities can actually do to reconnect with the American people?
I'll focus on the university piece of it. I think part of regaining trust is restoring a culture of honesty and honest self-appraisal for the institutions. There was a big study that came out in July. Some friends of mine did a research project on a national database of syllabi across America. So the students, the texts and readings that are being assigned to students. And what they found was that there's been an extreme narrowing of the ideological range of viewpoints, especially on hot button topics. And the 3 topics that they focused on, where they found the most narrow range of ideological viewpoints in the readings, this is across the whole country, were these 3 topics: Israel-Palestine, race and criminal justice, race in our criminal justice system, and abortion. So those are 3 topics on which we would hope our universities would be leading the way, providing students the chance to think for themselves about the best arguments on the different sides of these really complicated, really difficult, really important issues. But no, we've found that our universities have failed that. So I think trust is going to involve something like, in the university's case, an honest self-appraisal of where we are, where we've gone wrong. And when professors and presidents and administrators are admitting that we've gone wrong in some ways, then we have the ability perhaps to start presenting solutions that people will take seriously. But until that day, it's hard to take it's hard to hope for trust.
Can I expand on that in two ways? One, there's a faculty governance crisis happening on campuses that is really hard for people on campuses to talk about because they're worried about the silencing effects of admitting the problem. Your 20-to-1 point about certain disciplines, or 100-0 point in some disciplines, but a partisan
Anthropology.
spectrum of historically 2-to-1 to 20-to-1 over time is super important, because the way the accreditors reaffirm your access to Perkins loans, Stafford loans, and Pell Grants is one of the criteria is whether or not there's shared governance on the campus. What shared governance is supposed to mean is the president and the board are responsible for the finances, student admissions, athletics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But she cannot, or she and her board cannot decree the curriculum. That must be done in dialogue with the faculty. What really happens, in point of fact, at most campuses is most things are quasi-shared, and the curriculum is mostly handed over to the faculty on their own, and the faculty are mostly self-replicating whatever disciplines have existed before, which means as certain disciplines, and especially in the humanities and the social sciences, become more mature or more bureaucratized, people, when they retire, tend to hire other people who look intellectually exactly like where the debates are today, which is almost exactly the opposite of why we have tenure. In 1992, the Hubble telescope went out far, and it came back with data that made no sense to 93% of all astrophysics departments out there, because almost everybody was a steady state theorist, except a bunch of really, really old dudes, maybe a couple of dudes and gals, but mostly really old dudes who were Big Bang theorists who'd been tenured 45 years before. And they said, wait a minute, I have an algorithm that explains what Hubble's telling us. The purpose of tenure is supposed to be to create greenhouses to preserve intellectual diversity, but a lot of our academic departments are so nichified that they self-replicate exactly, and over time, anybody that has a different view can't possibly pass the ideological tests of getting hired. And so I'll give you one statistic that builds on the president's point about self-censorship. It isn't just conservatives that self-censor. There was a meta-study done of the Northwestern undergraduate population about 4 months ago, and don't quote me, I can't remember, are we streaming? Is this, yes. We are off, okay. Then I want to qualify every sentence so that I don't later have a single sentence where I'm supposedly making up a statistic. I'm doing this from memory, I didn't plan to talk about it, but I think it was, I've done this. I've had those political attack ads run before where you say on the one hand and on the other hand, and the opposite of your position becomes the ad on TV. I think it was 83% of Northwestern students all across the ideological and political spectrum admitted to self-censorship and pretending to be farther left than they actually are. And it wasn't that the 17% were doing the opposite. It was that 14 of that 17% said, I don't have an opinion on this. But the 83% that answered substantively, including very far left students, said they felt the need to pretend they were farther left than they actually were, so that it didn't affect either their grades or their social status on campus. That's not a very intellectually interesting place. And faculty should want to self-reform, partly for politically pragmatic reasons, but primarily they should want to reform because serious people, serious thinkers, are curious. And we should like a marketplace of ideas, and we should try to make our theories better by inviting challenge from people who don't share all of our priors.
Yeah, I actually, I think that is such a very interesting perspective, and I don't disagree about wanting to bring in people who think like you, right, or replicate the areas. And so I do think that, including at Furman, that those are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about. I do appreciate, the talking about 83% of students saying they pretend to be more left. I do appreciate the fact that some of our professors within their courses sort of set the ground rules that give people more autonomy and normalize the notion that it is okay to debate the different ideas. And, you typically find that among sort of people who have been teaching for a while, who know how to bring out the best kind of conversations in the classroom. And like I said, there are so many things that we need to do to keep improving, but I think what you're saying is really, in terms of how our students are reacting, is we have got to be more attentive to that.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I hope that we've got the questions coming from the audience, and I know that that's backstage someplace. But I'm going to ask this one last question. I'm going to pick up on something that Ben said. The middle of your talk blew my mind, all right? So I've been reading some of this stuff about how AI is going to transform everything we do, and if you kind of buy into some of what our favorite tech bros are saying in Silicon Valley, you know, growth is going to skyrocket. We're all going to be rich, and we won't really have to work that much anymore. And I'm very much looking forward to those days. I'm thinking it's called retirement, but you know, first of all, I have my doubts about whether the Tower of Babel can actually be built. But it kind of reminded me of Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. You know, like you have this dystopian world out there, but there are these people that are still reading books and are preserving the culture. So, you know, what if American universities would have to really diversify in a lot of ways? You would have to have many more universities that are only fit for career purposes. But then you would have to have some, let's call them small liberal arts schools in Greenville, South Carolina, who are really trying to shape human beings in the way that I quoted Wendell Berry. Yuval Levin had a recent piece on how we need to admit that we are educating a meritocracy here, and that we have to do a much better job of morally forming our elites in this country, which still means you have to talk to people. You have to do on discourse. You have to read books, and some of those books are really hard to read, but they're rewarding. And in some sense, just accept that we are going to be a bubble. We want to be a bubble. We're not really about training people for jobs. We're about training people for being human beings, because that's still going to be needed in an AI world, or we're all going to be eaten by robots. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, so first of all, you did the great line a few times about heaven or hell. I do a lot of work in some of my corporate board life on some AI issues, and people regularly want to say, so is AI going to bring heaven or is AI going to bring hell? Yes. The or is wrong. What new technologies are going to do is humans are really interesting and really crafty and really talented and also really broken and really corrupt. And what AI is going to do is warp speed on everything. Good stuff can get better, faster, cheaper, and a lot of bad things can get really, really bad fast. And so I think the optimist, pessimist, or the accelerationist versus safetyist schools on technology tend to get it wrong, because the debates are immediately apocalyptic about, are drones going to kill us all, or are we going to get flying cars real cheap real soon? The much bigger problem is Huxley, not Orwell. Right? At the end of the day, what the technologies do is they give us access to Vegas all the time. And no disrespect to anybody who loves Las Vegas. We're on streaming, so Vegas is a wonderful place. But at the end of the day, Tocqueville is a good way to get back to freedom from, freedom to questions. We want freedom from political constraint. We want freedom from economic deprivation. But what you really want is freedom to. You want the right affections. You want the right loves. And I think we know well that what screen addictions do to us doesn't give us the right loves. It gives us a short-term casino in our frontal lobe that says, give me more dopamine hits about the really bad stuff for me. And so I believe you're right that we need to be forming virtuous citizens, and that requires the humanities to be taken a lot more seriously than nichified, politicized, ideological fights. It should be wanting to have students, when they walk across the stage at graduation, be the kinds of people that we think have really grappled with what's good and what's true and what's beautiful.
I'll add, if I may, a heaven-hell AI story in the university context. I was at a dinner at Vanderbilt 2 weeks ago, and we had a fascinating conversation. There were about 30 HXA professors around a dinner table talking. And the hell part was when one of the professors who does German intellectual history, I was telling some of the Tocqueville students about this, which you guys don't know, German intellectual history is like really smart people do that. It's like really hard. It's like German intellectual history. And he was saying, though, this person who obviously loved German intellectual history, he says that he thinks now the best AI work in German intellectual history, the novel work, is as good as the best German intellectual historians. So he was saying that he thinks that AI is actually at the place or near the place where you'll have better research done by the computers than by people like him. That's the hell part. Here's the heaven maybe part. Later on, in that same dinner conversation, the professors shared that the class who are currently freshmen at Vanderbilt are the first class who, during their high school year, had their phones removed from their classrooms. So that class had just the spring of their senior years in high school, no phones in school. At Vanderbilt, apparently, they regularly ask the students, do you want to have tablet-free, computer-free classrooms or not? And usually kids want their computers because they want to play video games during their lecture or whatever it might be. But at Vanderbilt, this fall, it turns out the freshman class who had that high school experience are overwhelmingly voting to have no computers in their classrooms. They want to have their books. They want to have their notepads, a paper and pad. They want to be sitting there in real time interacting with one another. So I'm not sure what to say about those two things, but at the same dinner conversation, we heard what the drones are coming for the German historians. And we also heard that students themselves are opting to put down their computers and pick up their pencils and look at one another.
Hear, hear for Gen Z, right? Okay, so there seems to have been a breakdown in the questions coming for the audience. So I'm going to do something I'm not supposed to do, which is I'm going to ask for someone, and we'll have to do one because we're coming up on time, but one person who's willing to come all the way down to the stage and speak into my microphone and ask our panel a question. And I know you're out there. Oh man, you have to be in the middle of the row. I want a student first, if I could have a student. I will take a community person, but I want a student. Come on, come on. All right, we got Luke right down here. Come on down. One of our Tocqueville fellows.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. So both Dr. Sasse and President Davis, or excuse me, Senator Sasse and President Davis, both, and then a common theme throughout all the remarks was about trust in institutions, and President Davis and Senator Sasse mentioned less people trusting institutions and willing to send their children to, or seeing higher education as a valuable place to send your children or to spend 4 years of your life. Is it worthwhile that we should be advocating for a view where higher education is something that most or all members of American society should aspire towards, or is it something where not everyone needs to go to get a bachelor's degree or even postgraduate degree?
So y'all are canceling dinner. We're here for an hour now.
Yeah. I've always been of the mind that post-secondary education of some form, whether it's technical education, 4 years or beyond, really can benefit individuals and the society. I do think it is unreasonable to think that every individual is cut out for this experience, a UF experience, but I firmly believe that something post-secondary is important really for as many of our citizens as possible.
I'll drop a bomb on this one. I doubt it. I don't think so. There's no magic in the number 18. There's no magic in the number 22. I think what matters is what experience people have intellectually, what opportunities they have. My own view, and here's maybe the bomb, is that our high school system is tragically broken, that our high school system is racially divided in ways that's terrible and I think deeply unjust. I think we should have much better, more free high schools. I think the government monopoly, here's the bomb, the government monopoly on high school, on teaching and learning has not worked well at all in America. If we could have more dynamic, more creative, more innovative experiments in younger people's learning from, say, 14 to 18, maybe we'd find that a lot of people could have learned the things they need to do to individuate, to be the people they want to, the person they want to be, and they go off and start a career working in the trades, for example, and they live a worthwhile, valuable life. That might also include lifelong learning without 4 years of going to college.
Last word.
I don't want to be boring by agreeing too easily, but I feel like John stole my notes.
Really?
Well, on the 18 is no magic. So I think, in terms of adolescent and developmental psychology, if you look across millennia, there's kind of a grammar stage, a logic stage, and a rhetoric stage. As people are coming of age, there's a time when they love to memorize, there's a time when they love to really wrestle through the core of what the argument is, and then we become sort of poetic around puberty, where you want to tell a whole bunch of stories about it, and you want to make a case, you want to try to persuade people. And I think 18 is a little bit old to be sort of saying we're now ready to do adult kinds of things, and yet it's obviously also too young. We know that frontal lobes aren't formed. I don't mean to say something, again, we're streaming. I don't mean to say something about gender and biology at a time when it's prohibited, but one thing we do increasingly know about the human brain is that male and female brains are quite different, and it turns out the female brains are just a lot more valuable. More cross-hemispheric connections are more valuable than more same-side front-to-rear hemispheric connections. Intense focus comes from same hemisphere, but cross-hemispheric stuff is what helps you navigate complexity. Guess what world we're entering? Ultra complex for all of human history. So one thing we know for sure, we don't know when women are actually fully formed and no longer girls and women, but we know that boys are not fully formed with executive function until the late 20s at the earliest. Right, and here's how you know. If you go out on I-26 tonight and a motorcycle passes you at 130 miles an hour, there are two truths. Dude, under 25. There's never been a 60-year-old woman that stupid in all of human history, right? So at one level, 18 is both too young to be done, but it's way too old to get started. And I think the question is, when someone's an adult, are they gritty enough to get up off the ground and get retrained again for the work stuff? And on the even more important stuff, do they care about ideas enough that they're rereadables in their life? That they're big and important books that they've read or that they want to read, and that they're going to read again and again and again and again because they need to question. And that needs to be true of both people who don't go to college and people who do go to college. And right now we're not good enough with either population. I love this institutional form, not just Furman, though it's glorious. But I think higher ed is a pretty great inheritance, but I don't think it's the only institutional architectural way to build coming-of-age institutions.
I just want to say that the business about female brains and male brains did not come from my notes.
I just want to know how we actually have that information. Is it scientific study around the differences of gender? I'm being sarcastic. Yes. No. No, but these are the kinds of things that we have to study, we have to talk about, right?
Yes, I do. Right.
Since we ended up at technology a lot. This is a David Foster Wallace quote. This is decades ago. How prescient is this? I've been noodling on this all week. We should be clear that technology is just going to get better and better and better and better, and it's going to get easier and easier, and it's going to get more convenient and more convenient, and more pleasurable and more pleasurable. More pleasurable to be alone with images on a screen given to us by people who do not love us but just want our money. Which is all right, I guess, in low doses, right? It's all right in low doses. But if that's the basic main staple of your diet, you're going to die. In a meaningful way, you're going to die. That was in Height's notes.
Oh, wow.
That was so cheery.
Way to end it. Okay, so the last 45 seconds has blown up the business model of all colleges in America. which we haven't even talked about, and that's like what Dr. Davis is going to have to do on Monday morning. So, and we'll need another hour to talk about that. Are you ready? No. Now we're going to go exercise our underformed brains out on the mall all night, getting ready for homecoming tomorrow. You've been a great audience. Thank you so much for coming. Let's thank our speakers, and you're dismissed.
Thank you.
That was great. That was very fun.